Hey everyone, what's up? So when Rocksteady finished the last batch of DLC that they had planned for Arkham Knight last month, it really got me thinking, what would I like to see from them next? This has been a pretty hot topic of debate ever since Arkham Knight came out and even before it. I think even those who didn't necessarily like Arkham Knight are still excited about seeing what Rocksteady will do after getting to break away from the Arkham formula. Since Rocksteady really broke new ground when Arkham Asylum first came out, I think people are eager to see what Rocksteady will do next when they get to move on to something completely fresh again. We still haven't even seen what they're capable of yet so far this gen, which is another reason why I can't wait to see what they'll do next. Arkham Knight was a fantastic game in my opinion, and that was all on the Unreal Engine 3 from last gen. So imagine what they'll be able to achieve when they move on to a new engine with the Unreal Engine 4. Now that they've finished the DLC for Arkham Knight, I'm guessing the whole team is now focused on their next project, which must have moved into production soon after Arkham Knight was finished back in June. Meanwhile, WB Montreal updated us at the end of July with a vague statement that they are working on an open world action game for current gen platforms, which I think is actually the rumoured Suicide Squad game. The rumour first started when Jeff Johns said some time ago at San Diego Comic Con that a Suicide Squad game was in development and that it would be very violent. I can definitely see a game based on them, and it would make a lot of sense given that the movie comes out this year. So I've narrowed down what Rocksteady's next game could be to 3 possibilities, and the first is a Superman game. If someone handles a Superman game, it has to be Rocksteady. There were quite a few Superman Easter eggs in Arkham Knight, with some being more obvious than others. You had the giant LexCorp building on the 3rd island of Gotham City, the various billboards scattered across Gotham City advertising LexCorp, and the voicemail left by Lex Luthor for Bruce Wayne if you check the phone in the penthouse at Wayne Tower. Obviously this doesn't mean definitively that they are working on a Superman game as they are just Easter eggs, but it's definitely a possibility given that Rocksteady are now acknowledging that Superman is out there somewhere in the same universe. It's no secret that Superman has had a rough history with video games though, with games like Superman 64 and the Superman Returns movie tie-in. Like a lot of other superhero games, Superman Returns nailed the feel of moving around as the hero, but pretty much botched everything else. I think the best Superman game we've had so far is Superman Shadow of the Apocalypse, which really isn't saying much, but it was actually an okay game for its time. It had a similar visual style to the one in the animated series, and even had the cast from it come back to voice their characters. You got to handle all of Superman's powers, even X-ray vision despite it being limited, and flying around felt great. There were even stealthy missions where you got to play as Clark Kent. It was just a shame that it had a poor story and that you were fighting nothing but robots most of the time, with the gameplay itself just being pretty bland. It would obviously be a massive challenge to get a Superman game to work for some of the reasons that I'm about to mention, but if anyone can do it, it's Rocksteady. A pertinent point that I saw someone make the other day was that we've never actually had a great game where you can play as someone who can fly around wherever he wants. I mean sure, we've had games where you can fly around in planes like GTA, but it's not the same. When you look at all of the great superhero games we've had so far like the Arkham games and Infamous, you can only glide at best. The problem with having a character who can fly at incredible speeds is that you have to design a very large map to accommodate this, otherwise players will feel like the map is a lot smaller than it would be in any other video game. This is what Superman Returns did. It nailed the feel of being able to move around really fast as Superman by giving you a very large metropolis. Unfortunately, there wasn't very much in it, and what was there got very repetitive and stale, so going this route means you'd have to compromise too much on density. But maybe with the tools that developers now have at their disposal, it might be possible to achieve a good balance. I've also seen people say that, you can't do a Superman game because he can go anywhere in the world and even into space, and you can't recreate this in a game. But I don't see why he can't stay in Metropolis for narrative reasons, for the same reason that he didn't fly over to Gotham during the events of Arkham Knight. Another problem that I see constantly brought up is that Superman is simply too strong to be in a video game. I don't like the idea of nerfing him however to get over this hurdle, as that would ruin the fun. The way Superman Returns dealt with this was by having a health bar for the city itself, where it would be game over if you let Metropolis take too much damage. I don't think this was implemented as well as it could have been however, as I don't think it should have been used for the entire game. It didn't suit the more powerful enemies like Metallo, who weren't as much of a challenge as they should have been, because they focused too much on damaging the city more than the person they were actually fighting. And then by the end the game just said screw it and had you fighting tornadoes. Something that works from Shadow of the Apocalypse was the idea of having timed missions, which could work in a mission for a future game where you have to save a crashing plane for example. I feel like it's usually the people that don't know a lot about Superman that over-exaggerate his strength. The city could be populated with enemies that could take on Superman physically in mobs, like Cadmus clones, other Kryptonians from Zod's army, parademons, and maybe the new gods of the apocalypse. For lower level enemies like your usual human thug, there could be a timer for taking them down as quickly as possible before something bad happens. Or alternatively, they could be given kryptonite based weapons from Lex. Plus, Superman doesn't necessarily have to die for it to be game over. He could be given a stamina bar that runs out if he takes too many hits from powerful enemies. A stamina bar shouldn't be there to limit the use of his powers like in the previous games, because it makes no sense. I believe that there have been good ideas in the past in otherwise poor or average games that can be built on to make a great Superman game. There have been some great Superman stories in the past from the comics and DC's animated movies, but I'd love to see one in a video game for a change. Furthermore, there are so many diverse villains to choose from Bizarro and Metallo to Brainiac and Zod. I know making a great Superman game is easier said than done, but I do think that there is one waiting to be made. Rocksteady said in a recent interview that a Superman game would be almost impossible to make, so maybe they might not be making a Superman game after all, but it could have been a misdirection for all we know. Nevertheless, I think Rocksteady's next game will most likely end up being a Justice League one. The next 4 years or so are going to be big for DC's cinematic universe. We have Batman vs Superman in 2 months now, Suicide Squad in August, and the Wonder Woman coming next year, just to name a few, as well as a Justice League movie that will be split up into 2 parts. It would be a great way to capitalise on this by making a Justice League game that's actually good, and Warner Brothers obviously knows this. I think we are also going to get an Injustice 2 Gods Among Us game from NetherRealm Studios for that very reason. I could definitely see Rocksteady's Justice League coming out in between Part 1 and 2 of the Justice League movie, or in the same year as Part 2. If you cast your mind back to 2012, you'll remember that Variety reported that Warner Brothers wanted to introduce members of the Justice League in the next Rocksteady Batman game. This Justice League game would have been a prequel focusing on the time Batman first met the Joker, and it would be based on DC's Silver Age era of comics when the Justice League was first established. I remember hating the idea when I first saw it because I'd prefer a more modern take. The reason Warner Brothers wanted to do this was because at the time they were planning a Justice League movie for 2015 written by Will Beall, and they wanted a game to expose audiences to them beforehand. A lot has changed since then, however. Rocksteady released Batman Arkham Knight last year, and a Justice League movie won't be coming out until 2017 now, that'll be made by Zack Snyder. So I don't think we'll be getting a Silver Age Justice League game, but I definitely think that there is one on the cards because this shows WB's clear desire to want Rocksteady to do a Justice League game to coincide with their movies. I don't think it'll tie into the films though, it'll be based on the comics more than anything else like the Arkham games. Rocksteady also heavily hinted at the end of their latest episode of Arkham Insider on their YouTube channel that they still aren't done with Batman completely, which tells us it will either be a Justice League game or another solo Batman game, but I'll get onto the solo Batman game later. There were also a few Easter eggs in Arkham Knight for other superheroes and even a Justice League supervillain. In the Batgirl DLC there was a tank holding a starfish with a huge eye that looked like Starro, who is of course one of the biggest enemies of the Justice League. There was also that building owned by Queen Industries, a shift list in the GCPD with the name John Jones on it, and if I remember correctly, there was a thug talking about Coast City. And of course there were the big Superman Easter eggs that I mentioned earlier, which could actually be hinting at Justice League instead. I think the ending of Arkham Knight also left things wide open for a Justice League game. Faking his death meant that he could leave the Bruce Wayne persona behind for good and be a different full-time Batman that could move on to join the Justice League. It would be a good reason for him to move away from Gotham and focus more on international or even cosmic matters. If you don't count the LEGO Batman games and Injustice, the only bona fide attempt we've ever really had at a full-on Justice League game was Justice League Heroes back on the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. It was a shame that it felt like nothing but a poor attempt at trying to emulate the success of X-Men Legends, so a big void is definitely still there. There is no doubt that a Justice League game would be very hard to make. Not only would you have to deal with Superman, but also other heroes like the Flash who can run incredibly fast, and Green Lantern who can use his ring to make whatever he thinks of. I've always imagined an open world Justice League game where you can free roam with any of the members that you choose, and a GTA style system where you can switch between the different heroes on the fly. Maybe there could even be co-op if they find a way to make it fit in what will hopefully be a single player focused experience. People have always been on Rocksteady's case about not letting them free roam with other playable characters like Catwoman, Nightwing and Azrael, instead having to rely on mods and glitches. So I think a Justice League game would finally give them an epic chance to deliver on this, with each character having their own unique way of traversal. There's also more freedom with the cities they can choose to have in the game, seeing as the heroes of the Justice League come from different places. Maybe they could even explore the idea of having two separate cities, so Metropolis and maybe Coast City or Central City. It's been rumoured for a while now that Rockstar are going to try doing two different cities for the next GTA, and it could be something that Rocksteady considers too. This would definitely solve the problem of having characters like Superman and the Flash that can move around at huge speeds, and it might be possible now that they'll be moving on to a new engine after seeing what they achieved with an engine from last gen with Arkham Knight. Then you could have the Watchtower in space that you can teleport to like you could in DC Universe Online that would serve the same functions as Batman's hideouts in the Arkham games. All of the thugs and villains that you catch can then be locked up here too, like they could in the GCPD in Arkham Knight. Doing a Justice League game could also take the sidekick system that they developed in Free Flow Combat to another level, as you could have even more than two members working together, and maybe they'd be able to combine their powers for dual and triple takedowns. I feel like this would be the next logical step to take for this system, and I think it's almost guaranteed that we'll see this if they decide to do a Justice League game. When you think about some of the things I've said, a Justice League game would be a natural evolution of some of the things that Rocksteady have already done, and I think despite being the hardest option, it's also the likeliest. I have seen suggestions for other superheroes like Daredevil and Spider-Man, but Rocksteady won't be able to cover any Marvel properties because Warner Brothers actually acquired them back in 2010. Sefton Hill, the studio director, said, quote, "We're very much looking forward to creating more great games based on widely recognised Warner Brothers brands like Batman. So it's clear that Rocksteady will only be focusing on the properties in WB stable like DC superheroes, so it rules out Marvel's heroes as well as a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. Besides, Platinum Games have a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game covered anyway that will probably be coming out soon. I think there's actually a greater chance of getting a Harry Potter game from Rocksteady instead of those games more than anything else. The other route they could take is to make a Batman Beyond game. I think there is a very remote chance of it happening, but I'll talk about it anyway. I was a huge fan of the show and the animated film Return of the Joker, so I really hope this happens someday and that it's made by Rocksteady. However, I don't think this will happen for at least another couple of years after they've covered a Superman or a Justice League game, which I think the current hype for DC's cinematic universe demands. A futuristic Gotham with even better graphics than Arkham Knight would be amazing, especially when we don't even have that many open world games in a proper futuristic setting. The Batmobile is essentially a hovering car that can fly, which would be fun to use, especially when we didn't get the chance to fly the Batwing in the Arkham games, with it only being used to airdrop Batman's suit and some gadgets. Speaking of gadgets, seeing as it's set in the future, the Batsuit itself could do loads of things. It had a cloaking device which could make it go invisible but use the loss of the suit's power, rocket boots and retractable wings for flying and gliding, retractable claws for climbing and fighting, and it enhanced the traits of the wearer like strength and agility among other things. I'd also love to see Ace, his dog companion, come in and help you at times. The dynamic between Bruce and Terry would be great to see again, and Kevin Conroy and Will Friedle should definitely be brought back to voice their respective roles. I'd love to see villains like Shriek, Spellbinder, the Jokers, Blight and the Royal Flush Gang, and to have returning fan favourites like Bane and Mr. Freeze. But I'd prefer the main story to be another Joker-centric story that's very loosely based off of the Return of the Joker animated film. The only other Batman Beyond game we had was yet another movie tie-in for Return of the Joker, which I strangely enjoyed as a kid despite it being really bad. I've seen a lot of other people throwing around the idea of a Batman Beyond Arkham game, but I think they should take this opportunity to do a Batman game outside of the established Arkham formula. And by that I mean not having a game that takes place during the course of a single night with a city that's only crowded by enemy NPCs. They could use this chance to make a Batman game with a living, breathing city with tall buildings crowded with civilians where you can also go to Wayne Manor and the actual Batcave if you choose. They could maybe even have daytime sections where you play as Terry. He was Bruce's chauffeur in addition to being Batman, and it would be cool to have a mission similar to what happened in The Dark Knight when Bruce drove his Lamborghini around to save the day. I think it adds an extra touch to making you feel like the character. This has been done in multiple superhero games too, so it wouldn't be the first time. The ones that spring to mind are Spider-Man 2, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and Superman Shadow of Apocalypse. Anyway guys, that about rounds up everything I wanted to talk about. I personally don't mind which route they take, as I think all three have the potential to be amazing, but I'm willing to put money down on a Justice League game being on the cards. We'll have to wait quite a while before we get some news however, as I don't think their next game will be out until 2018 or even 2019. Let me know in the comments below what you think about some of the things I've said, or what you'd like to see Rocksteady do next. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and are looking forward to the next 4 years of superhero greatness as much as I am. Thanks for watching.